Now that you've downloaded and installed Blender, let's take a quick look at Blender's UI. So upon opening up Blender and getting past the splash screen, you're usually in the Layout workspace. Along the top bar here we have several different workspaces that we can use. We have Layout, Modeling, Sculpting, UV Editing, Texture Paint, Shading, Animation, Rendering, Compositing, Geometry Nodes, Scripting, and we have this plus icon that allows us to create our own workspaces or choose from a whole range of default workspaces. Now I'm going to go back to the Layout workspace since this is the most common workspace. In this workspace we have one large 3D viewport. In the top left hand corner of any of these editors we can change the editor type to suit whatever we need. So for example, if I wanted a giant UV editor, I could do that. I'll change that back to a 3D viewport. At the bottom we have this timeline editor. Now you can see that we have this thick black line in between each of these editor windows, and if we hover the mouse over any of these we get this double-sided arrow. This allows us to resize any of these editor windows to suit. In some cases, like between the outliner and the properties editor, we can increase the size of these without affecting anything else. Whereas in this case, if we increase this, it changes the size of every editor. Again, as I mentioned, we can change each of these editors to any type of editor we want. But what you might want to do is actually create your own custom workspace. So I'm going to use this shading workspace as a start. And you can see that in this shading workspace, we have quite a useful setup. We have our node editor at the bottom here, and we have our 3D viewport here. We also have a file browser on the left hand side and an image editor on the left hand side. However, these tend to take up quite a bit of space. So what I want to do is I want to create a custom workspace that just has the shading editor and the node editor on it. Now, depending on what you want to do, maybe you want to have a large 3D viewport at the top and the node editor at the bottom, or maybe you want to split the screen down the middle. So what I think I'll do is create both of those workspaces. So in order to create a new custom workspace, we'll go to this top bar, click this plus icon, and we're just going to click on Duplicate Current. So this gives us this new duplicate, which is exactly the same as a shading workspace. I'm going to double click where it says shading 0.001, and I'm going to change this to procedural shading or proc shade. And I'm going to put a large H after that because this is going to be my horizontal split. Now what we want to do is we want to get rid of this editor and this editor and just leave the two. So there are a couple of ways of doing that. The first way is just to go to the top bar, right click and click on close area, and this will close that down. In this case you can see that our image editor has now taken up that whole area. If we right click and close area again, you can see that now disappears and we have our horizontal split. Now, as far as this goes, this is pretty good. I can zoom in and out with my mouse wheel and I'll be able to see quite a large editor tree in here, and we can see our model here. We can zoom in and out with the middle mouse button. We have our outliner on the right hand side to choose our objects, and we have our editor to make any changes to any properties. And I'm quite happy with this. What I now want to do is I want to create a second custom workspace. I'm going to just use the middle mouse button to click and drag this across so I can see the plus icon. I'm going to duplicate current again, double click, and this time I'm going to just delete the last few characters there and add a V. And this is going to be my vertical split. So the way I'm going to split this vertically is I'm just going to click on this top panel. I'm going to close this area so I just have one giant shader editor. I'm going to click on this top header again, right click, and I'm going to vertical split. So now we get this line that we can move to whichever size we want. I'll just put this right in the middle. And now we have two editor windows. Now at the moment they're both shader editors, as you can see from this icon. I want the one on the left hand side to be my 3D viewport. So now I have that in there. I get the top view. And I can just orbit around a little bit so I can get a better angle on my object. Zoom in a little bit. Maybe make this editor a little bit wider. And now I have plenty of space to work with my procedural nodes. Now that we actually have these custom workspaces set up, I'm going to jump back to my layout workspace. And now I want to make sure that I save these and they appear anytime that I open up Blender. So I'm going to go to File on the top left hand corner, scroll down. I'm going to go to Defaults and I'm going to click on Save Startup File. I'll confirm that. And now that's saved, and we can see right at the bottom of the screen we have Startup File saved. Now if I close Blender, and I'm not going to save, I don't need to save this file, and I open up Blender again. If I just open a new general file, you can see that at the top of my screen I now have my two procedural shading workspaces saved. So now I can use those anytime I open up Blender without having to recreate them. You can also save anything else you want in your startup file. For example, by default we have this cube to start with. I can click on this, hit X to delete that, and maybe use Shift A to add a new mesh, and maybe use an ecosphere, and potentially give this a few subdivisions. Subdivisions just give you more geometry to play with, and it creates a smoother surface. And I'm also going to click on this object. I'm going to right click and I'm going to click on Shade Smooth. This gives it a more smooth appearance. Now this is going to be much better for adding on our procedural textures. But I think what I want to do now is just go to File again, go to Defaults, Save Startup File and confirm that. Now anytime I open up Blender, instead of starting with a default cube, I'll start with this default sphere instead. Now as we work through our procedural nodes and we start creating new materials, we will be using a startup file very similar to this. So your challenge in this video is going to be to create your own custom workspace. It can be anything you want. You can copy the procedural workspaces that I've created, or maybe you want to just make some adjustments to the original layout workspace. It's really up to you. But what you want to do is make sure you save that startup file by going to File, Defaults, and Save Startup File and confirm that. Then just close Blender, open it back up again and make sure all your changes have saved. And once you've completed that, I'll see you in the next video.